And residential property prices are expected to rise by at least 5% this coming year. New data has shown prices across the country increased by 8.6% in 2025. And while prices are up, momentum has slowed over speculation of possible interest rate hikes in coming months.
Well, Saul Eastlake is an independent economist who joins us now from Hobart. Saul, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Now, as we know, Sydney and Melbourne tend to lead the property market in Australia. They're the two most expensive capital cities. They're the most populous as well. We saw softer data there coming out of Sydney and Melbourne. Now, from what I've been reading, a lot of it has to do with the speculation of possible interest rate hikes. Was that the only reason, or are there other factors that are coming into play?
Well, I think there are other factors, Fauzia, and I observe that the softening in property prices in Sydney and Melbourne towards the end of last year is actually good news, especially for prospective home buyers. And it's not necessarily bad news for those who already own homes, given that over the past year, as you mentioned, property prices have on average risen by 8.5%. And indeed, for most of the past century, property prices have risen at a faster rate than incomes or other prices. That's in fact why we have a housing affordability crisis in so many parts of Australia. But Melbourne in particular has been doing better in that respect than Sydney. Melbourne is actually now cheaper in terms of median house prices, not just than Sydney, but Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth as well. And I think part of the reason for that is that Victoria has done a much better job than other states of boosting housing supply. Even though Victoria has a smaller population than New South Wales, in all but one of the last 20 years, Victoria has added more dwellings to its housing stock than New South Wales. Over the last 5 years, Victoria has completed 65,000 more new homes than New South Wales has, despite having a smaller population. The other thing that Victoria has done, possibly not intentionally, is that the increased taxes, land tax and stamp duty that the Victorian government in recent years has imposed on property investors do seem to have deterred some demand for property investors. And while that's categorised by property interests as being a bad thing, given that over 80% of property investors buy a property that already exists, an established home, rather than a new one, reducing the demand from investors for established properties is actually helping to reduce upward pressure on prices. So Melbourne prices are being driven, I think, by a favourable combination of increased supply and slowing demand, whereas particularly Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, and to some extent Sydney, you've seen strong growth in population, boosting demand, but supply has fallen short of that. And then most recently, as you said, of course, there's now speculation that instead of coming down next year, interest rates might be going up. That's obviously having some dampening impact on demand as well.
So, we've been talking about homeowners here, of course. Let's talk about the renters, of course, and this is where the housing supply really comes into play as well, doesn't it? We know that at least 1/3 of Australians are renters. We've seen rents rise significantly over the last 5 years. What about this year? Is this the time, as more houses, developments come in online, does that mean rents are going to start to come down?
Well, you would hope so, that with more supply coming on, including as a result of federal and state government policy initiatives, and also importantly with population growth slowing as the post-COVID surge in immigration starts to fade, bearing in mind that almost all migrants rent, at least initially, even those who are permanent migrants who might end up buying a home are going to rent initially, but the majority of the surge in immigration in recent years has been temporary migrants, and they add directly to the demand for rental housing. So that's slowing. That's a good thing from the perspective of rents, and hopefully vacancy rates, which in most cities are close to record lows, will start to rise, and that should mean some improvement in the outlook for renters as well. But it will be gradual.
Yeah. So we're just running out of time, but I do want to try to squeeze in this last question for your insight. We've seen subsidies for first home buyers come into play in the last year, and that, of course, has led to an increased competition with property investors. Is this what's leading or perhaps contributing to the higher property prices?
Well, it's absolutely a factor contributing to it. You know, we have 60 years of history going back to the first homeowners grant introduced by the Menzies government in 1964, that shows that anything that allows Australians to spend more on housing than they'd be able to otherwise results in more expensive housing. In other words, these subsidies to first home buyers end up in the pockets of second home vendors and existing property owners, which is why they don't work. The reason governments of all political persuasions keep doing things that make the problem worse is that they know that there are far more people who already own a property and who want property prices to keep going up, preferably at a faster rate than the price of everything else, than there are people who don't own a home but would like to. And so politicians do things that make the problem worse, because despite what they say publicly, they know that the vast majority of electors do not want the housing affordability problem to be solved. And that's why it hasn't been and probably won't be.